So today we've got some questions submitted, and some of them are a little bit more clinically orientated. And I picked these ones because I think they actually do cover some other topics. And then I wanted to share some other resources with you all as well. So the first, a little bit of housekeeping, I guess. So the first thing, just wanted to make sure that if you didn't see it on the email about that, the remote certification access is now available. That and so some people completed it last year, but then so if you do have a 12-month subscription, that will be automatically available in your in your account. And if not, if you've got like a shorter term subscription right now, I think John's offering like a $50 just to go through that training. So just give me a wave if you're yet to do that training, the remote certification. Okay. So
have I already done it, Jo?
So that's the one with, I think you have, Chris. It's the one with Deb Dana does the bulk of the presentation. And then there's a presentation by Tracy Stackhouse, that she's a pediatric occupational therapist from the States. And she really does, I think, a beautiful job of really talking about blending, sort of different frameworks, but in particular blending, the window of tolerance, that whole knowledge base with polyvagal theory, and then how to bring that into practice. And then there's a nice presentation by Dr. Liz Charles, who's an MD in the UK, who really sort of specialises with doing remote delivery of the SSP and does practitioner supervision. I think, Andrea, am I right? You
yes.
work with Liz? Yes.
Yes. So I get a lot of supervision from her, which is great. One thing I would like to say though is, although I've done the remote, I'd love to watch it again because it was so good. I feel I really need to watch it again, but I'm not providing SSP right now at the moment, so I haven't got a rental going. So maybe John will let me just do it for a small fee or something?
Just email, contact John. Our main goal is we want to support everyone and make sure that everyone's got access to resources and the knowledge base to continually, so you feel really excited about this intervention, as well as obviously seeing the results. And it really is like a bit of a learning journey, and the more you kind of hear the information, it kind of just adds layers, or different things you've heard before tend to resonate and make connections. So I still find that different things that I hear, and I'm like, this kind of fits in here and makes more sense there. So
could I ask a question? Is it available? I did try and follow the link and it looked like it was no longer available. Is that I should just email John?
Yeah, just email John if you've got any. And the one big thing to remember is you need to log into your account. So you remember there's a lot of these things that are available to you as practitioners, and it's kind of on the back end of the website. So in order to see them and get access to them, you need to log in with the password and then all those things will, that's often 9 times out of 10 that the issue of why you actually aren't seeing those different resources. Yeah, excellent. So that's the remote certification. Just wondering, has anyone had a chance I released another podcast the other week where I chatted with Liz Charles. Has anyone had a chance to listen to that yet? Andrea?
Looking forward to it, but not yet.
Okay. So those people listened, was there any take homes that you felt like it added another layer of, to enhance your current therapy? Anyone? Andrea, did you want to? Just need to unmute yourself, Andrea.
Really would love to see her. I guess the thing is that because I do a lot of work with Liz, there was nothing new there for me because I work with her with that approach. So, but I guess what was interesting was the whole concept of titration was really interesting in that. And the other thing, a little can sometimes be better. And the one thing that was interesting is the fact that often when people get to 3, they can manage it really, really well if you've like titrated it in very small amounts on 1 and 2. The other take home that I've learned was homework with Liz is like a lot of the sessions are, well, what did you do this week when you felt this? How did this feel? How have you prepared yourself? How did you manage it? Using a lot of the strategies that are embedded in a lot of the Deb Dana stuff and things. We use a lot of that, but just really just using a lot of strategies during the week. What are your sensory things that make you comfortable? What are the things you do when you feel like things are coming on? So a lot that's been really good. It really embeds it.
And I think some nice, and everyone's got their style. Everyone's going to have their style, and you may find that you sort of cherry pick some of the things that she talks about, but she does have it's a very dynamic and interactive SSP experience where, particularly in that beginning, because the whole framework of connection is her very first sort of priority, that she will do those short minute, 2 minutes of listening, and then sort of pause and check in. Sort of, what do you know? I noticed this in your face. You look like you're softening in your face. What do you notice? Or I noticed, the corners of your eyes seem to be sort of going up a little bit. What's all that about? Or what? And that she really, I see your shoulders. Your shoulders look like they're kind of like dropping down. So what did you notice that? Or so she really fine tune and hones in on sort of the minute parts. And when you really unwrap the social engagement system of all that, our facial expression, and really, Porges really talks a lot about that. It really is a window into our underlying autonomic state, and that we can really tap into those minute subtlety shifts and changes as a therapeutic process. And the more that we help our clients tune into those subtleties, then it builds up that sort of self-awareness when they're actually walking away from your sessions as well. If they sort of notice that, I feel like I've kind of been holding my jaw really tight now, and I can hear my voice is actually shorter and quicker, and then they become aware, I'm actually kind of anxiety. So, I've got a bit of stress. So while some of those strategies of really lowering my shoulders and slowing my breath and my pacing down, and what do I notice with that shift and change? So she's another nice resource. So if you get a chance to listen to that, I think there's some additional take homes that you'll get from that. The other resource that we'll see how we go for time today, I might try and pull up a little bit, but has anyone had a chance to watch? It would have come out in the newsletter from Unite, and if not, I will get a link and send it to you all. There was a recent discussion between Kim Barthel and Dr. Porges. Just give me a wave if you've had a chance to Donna, Rosa. So I think we've got just a couple of people who's had a chance to listen to that. So Tali, if you get a chance, I think, because I know we're going to go get to your question you submitted about assessments, but there's a nice segment in there from where Kim, who's an occupational therapist and is...
I love Kim.
Yeah.
I've done some of her courses. She's amazing.
Yeah. And she really is amazing. She really, again, just like Liz, helps you tune into where Liz was really, talking about unraveling the face and the voice, really does help us tune into what is happening in the body. And often if we've been more of a mind psychology kind of approached clinician, that this lens helps you kind of scan down a little bit more. And yes, we might look at posture and a bit of breath, but she'll help help you sort of tune into some of those sort of subtleties as well. So let me open it up, because Tali, one of the questions Tali asked recently was maybe what some of pre-post assessment tools that maybe some other practitioners might be using, because some of the resources that are on the website may feel, as you say, a little bit clunky. I don't use the BBC scales too often myself. I will use the MFAs. I think those give a nice kind of global little bit of a picture of what's sort of going on, particularly for my people who I might be supporting via distance. If I'm seeing a person in office, just because of my background in the auditory system, I will do a scan.
I was actually wondering about the scan and wondering, is that something that anyone can use, or do you have to have training, and do you have to be a certain profession to use it?
It is available through, I think it's Pearson.
I've seen it there. I just wasn't sure if that was.
Yeah. So you do have to have a level of as OTs, we can psychologists. You definitely have to have a level of education to access that. I don't think teachers can actually order the scan. So that is a tool which actually assesses auditory processing. It is a pretty, it's an easy assessment to actually implement. And I'm happy if people are interested and maybe want me to do a Zoom to run through kind of what that scan looks like. And you can sort of decide, but as a practitioner who decides they kind of really want to learn more about what is actually happening in that client's auditory world, essentially kind of what the test is it's all on a CD, and you have headphones, and you as a practitioner, particularly when you're starting off, you get a splitter cable so you can hear, and they're being prompted to repeat certain words. And those words might have background chitter chatter. So we know SSP is all about, can I pull voice out from background noise? There's degraded acoustic information, so it sounds kind of muffled, and can the ear fill in those missing pieces? There's filtration, there's dichotic listening. So we all with healthy auditory systems can hear kind of two things happening at the same time. So you can hear maybe the radio playing in the background with the music, and you're having a conversation with a friend or a family member, and all that auditory information isn't getting mixed up. That often people who those muscles aren't doing their job of filtering and out sounds, all that sound just gets mixed up. So those kind of like dichotic listening skills. So it gives you quite a nice test. And then as a practitioner, I think it just gives you a window into what their auditory world is and how they cope. And the assessment tool of observing an individual as they're actually going through the test is, sometimes you see kids and they're like, they're fidgeting, they're hanging off the chair, and the amount of work they have to put in just to listen is, you can see, well, no wonder they're like struggling in the classroom, because listening is such a hard word. And if they can't, and if that information is a bit degraded, so let's say the classroom's during station times, and so they've got the shuffle and all the noise, and the teacher's kind of talking and giving instructions, that kid is not going to be able to follow what that teacher is saying, because all that auditory information is just being mixed up. And then kids who are having speech and language difficulties, often they'll make up words of what they think they heard, or they're not very confident with their voice because their ear isn't always giving them clear acoustic information. For adults, it'll let you know why they're having a lot of conflict in relationships, in maybe why they're not being successful in different workplace environments, because they're in an open office arrangement and other people are on calls. There's chitter chatter happening with other desks, and because they can't filter that auditory information out, their nervous system is going to be absorbing that, and they're going to get heightened, and they're going to get a defensive state and have a response. So I know I'm going on a bit about this assessment, but I think from the information you get from it, you can really pull it in a very functional way to help explain for your client the impact of their auditory challenges they're having on their attention, emotional regulation, and relationships and connection. So I think it's a great tool, but it needs to kind of be done. It's an in-office kind of assessment tool. I haven't played with ever offer trying to do it. It would be just really hard to. Yeah.
Can I just ask, sorry, is there an age limit, like a lower age limit for it? And also,
so you do have a child version, and then an adolescent and adult version. So you do have, I think it's been a while since I pulled it out, Tali. Even though I used it as part of my research, I think it's 5.5 or 6 is where it starts off at.
I'm assuming the kids have to be verbal.
Yes, your kids need to be, your kids need to be able to be verbal to respond to that with that one. There are some other, I'll dig through some of my resources. There are some other auditory processing sort of checklists that may expand on what is in the MFA in the auditory section that I'll dig out and share with people. But the auditory component is a big piece to use as an assessment tool. We've got an auditory intervention that's targeting those middle ear muscles. So, it makes sense to assess that area a little bit more to know that we're really impacting that. And obviously we see overflow into those other areas of voice and expression and regulation and social engagement. But it's nice to know we're actually hitting the actual underlying mechanism itself.
Could you just clarify, the tool that you're talking about is the MFA? Is that, I missed that at the start?
Yes, yeah. So that's the measure of foundational abilities.
But you've been talking about the scan.
And then I've been talking about the scan. So the scan is the standardized assessment tool.
It's called scan, or does it have a name that?
So you've got scan C for children and scan A for adults. Yeah. And just to be clear with that, because that you're using it as an assessment screening tool to, for your clinical purposes, and it's not to diagnose that they actually have an auditory processing disorder that only an audiologist is able to actually give that diagnosis. So if you do it and it does come up quite deficit for that individual, you can have that conversation about if they want to go and pursue further testing to see if they want to sort of, get that diagnosis. I'd say 9 times out of 10, at least in my clinical experience, I've been using that tool for many, many years when I started with our focus system, that most people are like, okay, I know it helps explain what's actually happening to me. What do I actually need to do now to help try and improve the functionality of that system? But just so you sort of know, so then if you ever report you've used that as an assessment tool, particularly if you're, if they go and see an audiologist or they go see a speech pathologist, that they're not going to them saying, well, I saw my psychologist or my occupational therapist, or, and they said, they did a test that said I had an auditory processing disorder, that you're clear that the test is showing that you are having challenges in this area. But if you really, the diagnosis comes from an audiologist. Andrea?
It was just a quick question, just connecting back to the previous month when you mentioned about making a link between history of ear infections and grommets. And actually, it was me that had the running sinuses when you mentioned Miranda in one of the sessions. But do you know whether he's made any further connections around that whole issue? You said that you alluded to that, Stephen Paul just said there was potential there really about managing some of these issues that people have with ongoing grommets and ear infections. And then one of the reasons I say that as well is because research shows as well that a lot of children that have had ear infections and grommets at an early age often get that later diagnosis of autism, which all of that makes complete sense to me when you think about it. And I was just interested to know whether he's taking that further.
I'll also link another paper that Porges has written regarding autism. I'm actually in the process of putting a training together about really sort of unraveling, the key features of autism and re-looking at those from a polyvagal lens. I mean, I did give one a few years ago through the OT Association of kind of looking at the neurobiology of stress and autism. And because we see the key features of autism, are obviously speech and communication difficulties, social engagement difficulties, restricted and repetitive behaviours, which is a stress response. They have heightened sensory sensitivities. There's a high reported auditory sensitivities. Did I miss one? They're your main features. Also, comorbid. How many? I know PEDS is your specialty too, Tali. How many of these ASD kids are also comorbid diagnoses with anxiety, and then as later on with depression? So just as like we see in trauma, that when you've had an autonomic nervous system that's in a chronic state of overactivation, you get this sympathetic cascade, which is actually another. I've been asked by APS to do a couple of a series of presentations, and I'm kind of unraveling polyvagal into different ways. And it really is like a sympathetic cascade, that these systems, these defense systems become heightened, and they overexhaust, and the restorative systems aren't able to do. And we see, general anxiety, and then when that goes over the tipping edge, you see depression. And that's why when people actually come out of depression, and they actually move into a more heightened sympathetic activated state, and then they can move back up into more cortically regulated state. So yeah, I think you're right, and I think the importance of Andrew trying to pick up early on if we see these kind of auditory challenges in kids on the spectrum. Mm-hmm.
Joanne, sorry, can I just go back to the assessment?
Yeah.
So I know Unite came out with that sort of like pre-SSP assessment, or questionnaire rather, but it seems very much directed towards adults. It doesn't really seem like I sort of had a look at it, I'm like, this is not going to work for kids.
Yes.
Is there a child version of that or anything like that? No.
Nothing like that sort of being developed yet in terms of good questions to ask. And so you're thinking more about those sort of I
would almost like to have a questionnaire. Part of it is about just getting parents to stop and think before their child has the intervention about all the different things that this could impact on, so that they actually have a good think about where their child is now, so that afterwards they don't turn to you and say, oh, I didn't really notice any different. And then you've got to sit there trying to unpick it all and trying to say, well, sort of how's this been and how's that been? And then they say, oh, actually, now that you mention it, this is a little bit better. But so for those kids where there are shifts, but they're not dramatic, I feel like if there was a way of getting the parents to actually pause and think about all the different areas, and the measure of foundational abilities does do that to a degree, but it's so broad.
Yes.
That it almost doesn't. I feel like that's almost better in terms of the focus, in terms of the focus. So yeah, does that make sense? Like.
Yes, yeah. I know, I totally agree, because sometimes it's the shifts and changes that are very subtle, which don't come up in the MFA at all, that we sort of need to help tune families into. Let me reach out and sort of see if
I think I have read some on some overseas sites of people who've been using SSP, especially with non-verbal children. So there's these questions that they ask the parent, but I've just been looking on my in my.
Oops. You just need to unmute yourself, Donna. There you go.
Sorry, I just I'm pretty sure I've read some, but I can't seem to find where I've downloaded them to. And the questions that parents are asked about either very small children or children who are non-verbal. So if I can find it, I'll just send it to you, and people could just make their own from that, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
I make a comment. I put something in the chat. Sorry, I was half an hour late because of computers. Yeah, I'd really like to talk to you more, Joanne, because I'm actually planning to do a PhD on comparing early childhood refugee trauma specifically, but maybe other early childhood trauma. So I'm talking about 0 to 6. Comparing the trauma with neurodevelopmental disability. So that seems to link very well with your papers, for instance. So we need to talk. But I find this is a huge issue. First of all, I mean, I have a tool I use, but I need to expand it because we need to be able to look at how trauma and disability, how those two sectors interface, knowing when to refer to each other, etc. So I'm trying to expand that. So any tools people have got will be helpful, but that's certainly something I want to work on. And it seems to me that doing it with SSP would be a good way to do it. Yeah.
So let's maybe...
We do get children diagnosed with autism, and people are influenced by children lining the cars up, the cars up in a row, which when you think about it is normal for cars. And the eye contact thing. And you were talking about your sympathetic cascade. And so a lot of the children I see won't have eye contact if they're in a strange room with strange people being assessed for 6 hours. So we really need to look at that comorbidity and also is it a true diagnosis or not. Now, when it comes to SSP, in a way, the diagnosis is not what really matters. What really matters, I think, as a beginner, is seeing the signs and then working with that. So I'm not sure what you think about that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think the diagnosis really matters so much when we're putting our lens on, when we're looking at, when we're really looking at what is that underlying regulation that we want to, is kind of what we want to target regardless of what walks through your door. So maybe I'll put an email out there and put it on the Facebook and I'll reach out to see what's maybe been a step, because I know Doreen Hunt does a lot in PEDS, and we'll see if there is like a resource for questions for PEDS and a nice little kind of polyvagal related checklist to help tune parents into the subtleties of you know, tone of voice, facial expression, you know, posture, because, you know, and the cues where the child is actually trying to connect with them. So let me just keep that tone, because I just want to get back to Rosemary about like developmental trauma in that 0 to 6 population. So Rosemary, I've actually there's a group in Sydney, Starts. That's
where I work.
Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh.
Well, among other things, I've got NDIS as well, but yes.
Right. Yeah. So that's, and I remember having conversations with Shayla, and yeah, she basically said, which I'm sure you see, that half these kids that they see, you know, refugees experience, you know, torture and abuse in their own countries, you know, they come in and they look like they've got ASD. These kids look like they have ASD, but neurogenetically they actually don't, but they present that way because of the trauma and the stress, and it makes sense. It's a biological response to, it's a defense mechanism that's the nervous system's moved into.
But it is also cortisol in the mother during the pregnancy. So that begs the question of whether it in fact is a neurodevelopmental, if, you know, like alcohol syndrome, you know.
Well, I think the research even speaks to about epigenetics, that things are actually being passed down through epigenetics. So when they've done studies of, I think I might have mentioned one time, and I'll put this in their research. One of my favorite other speakers, Robert Sapolsky. I know he's written a number of books. He's a professor. He's quite an enjoyable man to listen to. But he's written, you know, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and that is a brilliant book that really unravels.
Why who don't get ulcers?
Why zebras why zebras don't get ulcers, and just talks about the whole stress response and really unravels that. But he also has a YouTube kind of mini documentary that's not boring, that's so engaging. And it's called Stress, the Underlying Killer. And in that, he follows the research where they followed, it's been a while since I've watched it, but basically during the war, the Dutch, basically the army surrounded the Dutch, and essentially, the Nazis they starved them to death, essentially. Basically, they stopped any food coming into the country. So people were basically starving to death, and mothers were having to give up their children, and so incredibly sort of stress. So they actually followed these survivors, mums who were pregnant at the time, infants who were born during or just after. And they found that this cohort, even though they immigrated to America or Australia and moved into environments where, their life was safe, genetically, they were predisposed. They had a higher incidence of cancers, of mental health, bipolar, chronic mental health disorders, early, poor longevity and obesity, cardiac health. So it really the research gave the evidence to show that epigenetically, that when we had ancestors that experienced a certain amount of stress, that their DNA is modified and it gets passed down through the generations, and that later generations' DNA is sensitized to a heightened stress response. So they takes less of stress in their environment that'll start to trigger that cascade and that overload into other health issues. So Robert Sapolsky, I love him. He's another great resource. He's got some great YouTube videos, and and so I'll put that out in a little as well. And I see somebody's talked about Bruce Perry's work in the chat box. So Bruce Perry, his work is amazing, and another brilliant resource to tap into in terms of the neurosequential model. And his work, I think we just overlay with polyvagal, but in particularly he has like the inverted triangle, and the brainstem at the bottom, then you kind of got limbic area in the middle, and you got the cortex at the top, and really talks about how the brain develops from bottom up, inside out, and that we know from polyvagal really talk about how our social engagement system developed evolutionary from being more along with reptiles, where you flee or you froze when there was a threat. There's no social interaction sort of really going on. It's all brainstem sort of processing of the environment. But as we evolved, we had that sort of migration of vagus nerve to that ventral vagal system in the brainstem that connects with those neural networks for face and voice and eyes and ears listening, that gives us a sophisticated social engagement system to linking into our physiological state. So that's sort of tightly connected, but very much in that inverted, where all that inverted triangle at the brainstem is where all the sensory information comes in, and it acts as that portal of kind of working out where am I going to relay it to. But if it's under threat, it doesn't get relayed up to the cortex for the higher thinking. So his work is Bruce Perry's neurosequential model is another great resource if you haven't come across that before. So Robert Sapolsky for a nice unraveling of all the details of stress, and great research sharing for that. And then also, Bruce Perry. So somebody just shared about some work by Mark Wallen. It didn't start with you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Lisa. I'll have to check that one out with you. So I feel like I'm sort of going around a little bit. But getting back to your question, Tali, because I think somebody else sent a question in too about people who don't feel that they've had a response to the protocol, or they're noticing, so don't feel they've had a response. I think that's where having this sort of education piece up front, almost like a checklist, to help parents sort of tune into those subtleties of shifts and changes in the face or the body and the posture and their breathing and even their pacing of how they're actually communicating. And do they notice that the communication shifts from them asking them a question and the child actually giving a little bit more information than what they typically would, you know, and them being aware of their own response to help facilitate that ongoing communication.
It's interesting because I've also been using Kelly Maher's interception curriculum quite a bit recently. And there seems to be a really interesting sort of overlap between the two because, you know, in terms of being able to recognize a response, you know, often the kids don't recognize their own shifts internally. So therefore, you know, particularly for the verbal kids, if the parents are saying, you know, are you feeling any better? Or, you know, if they like asking those questions, you know, or like, did you notice that there's been any changes? Often the kids can't feel those differences themselves because they're just not good at tuning into their own sort of interoceptive awareness. So, yeah, just makes it interesting.
Yes, yeah, no, that's a good resource.
Add in there, I'm working very much in the Kelly Marler space, in the links and polygal. So a colleague of mine, Susan Fowler, she's talking a couple of conferences this week. So she's writing a book around linking the two together, disability, polyvagal, sensory systems. And yeah, it's the whole thing about the good thing about using SSP. It's a great opportunity to develop the self-awareness tools that Kelly Marler uses to increase the people's self-awareness, because she has a really clear structure and the learning strategies are really effective. So yeah, developing that self-insight.
And I think
Can I just share that's one of the reasons I use the behaviour symptoms assessment as part of the program, because I can go back and revisit it several times, and the way that it's been, I found it really useful. I got it off ILS website originally, but one of the reasons I prefer that one to some of the more recognised ones that they use is because it does cover some of those little quirks that kids might have that when they go back and revisit and see there's been some shift, it actually helps them to see some of the differences that have happened.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Anyone else have any other sort of assessment tools that they've been using that they'd like to share?
Well, like everyone else, by the sound of it, I've used lots of different early childhood assessment tools. And the problem, there's a lot of problems, which is why I need to really redevelop mine. A lot of them are parent report, which makes sense. Makes sense. The parent is with the child, etc. However, where there is trauma, for instance, like refugee trauma, and people from other cultures can be quite fearful of repercussions and may not report accurately. Repercussions being stigma, but also the not understanding our child protection system and thinking that if they say their child has a problem, their child will be taken away, and that you have to work through that, and distrust of governments and all the rest, all those things. And it can take a while to build up trust. I mean, this is one of my issues with assessment generally, particularly diagnostic assessment, is that trust needs to be built before, and children have to become comfortable before you see who they really are. But the parent report is necessary, but we need also the therapist or the worker to be able to assess as well and compare those and look at different contexts. And the other thing is that well-used tools like the ages and stages and the SDQ are not validated across cultures. They're not validated for refugees. So in my case, we need to develop and validate something that is culturally sensitive, that is easy to translate, etc. So there are there's huge issues with assessment tools. We have to use what we've got, but we also have to interpret with caution.
So just in the chat books, it was shared about the body scan as self-assessments. Is that like so somebody want to talk about?
Well,
Andrew, you just need to unmute yourself again.
Kelly Marler's, that's more just like a self-assessment of how children are tuned into their own bodies. But I think it's kind of, and it's not a standardized assessment, but it is, you know, using a form of ways that children can relate to themselves about how they're feeling and where they feel things in their body. So Kelly's got a few of those ideas about how to do that for children of different ages. So while they're not, I feel like because they're very child focused, that they, you know, and that you can work on activities around it. That's one way of getting some information, but building fun and trust at the same time, possibly. And
Paul just does have, we do have the body perception questionnaire, but it's just definitely more orientated for adults. Yes.
It's more, this one here, yes. Kelly Marler book, she's got a few ideas in there how to do it. But she's got some work, she's got games and workbooks and things that might be child friendly and accessible, and less confronting.
Yeah, I mean, I've got her workbook. She basically, what she's trying to get is she's trying to get children to work, to pay attention to various parts of their body and be aware of what they're actually feeling in those parts of their bodies. And she sort of literally just runs through everything from hands and feet, starting with simple things like hands and feet, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and then works towards sort of the deeper, like bladder, gut, you know, sort of, so being able to, even you're talking about paying attention to whether you're hungry or not hungry and how your tummy can be feeling. But what's really nice about it is that once she's kind of gone through all the physical things of like how each thing feels, she talks about how to pair it with emotions. So like, in other words, you know, if you've got an achy tummy and shallow breath and a beating heart, what feeling could that be? So, you know, helping kids to sort of make the connection between the physical things that they're feeling and the emotions. Yeah.
I would also add to that what it does really well is it helps children separate out, say, for example, hangry. Am I hungry or am I angry? Yeah. Feelings of anxiety can feel like feelings of hunger pangs, and it helps children start differentiating them. And adults as well, actually. And so from that perspective, it pulls things out and I think it fits really well with bagel, just tuning into your body.
Also share something that's really fascinating.
What's the age range for the Kelly Marler?
Can we let Jill?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm new to SSP. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, psychologist. And so one of the things that we often use is also, you know, not only tuning into sensory and interoceptive, but also thinking about imagery, feeling, metaphor, symbol, you know, the storytelling part is also really valuable information and anchor the way some children might feel their body or know their sensation. That might not actually always be a starting point as an internal process as well. I'm just curious with, you know, thinking about that qualitative assessment too with my daughter. I've just recently done the program as well, and just tracking, we did drawing together. We did half-hour segments, and so we have this wonderful collection of drawings over the period of time. Fascinating. The first drawing she did was a snake. You know, I'm thinking, oh my God, there's the reptilian brain. This is amazing. You know, moving on to these drawings where she's drawing this beautiful blossom tree. It doesn't have petals at the bottom. It has them all at the top. Social engagement system, you know, with a crown. And so these beautiful kind of images that felt like they were representing these different aspects of the body system. Next, she wanted to draw, we drew together. It was a collaborative piece. And so I had to draw, she had to draw. So it was literally this experience, this dance together of the drawing process, moving up to then drawings that are about family, then drawings that were like her and the family and the universe, and these kind of broadening and kind of more expansive pictures of kind of contextual. And it's just been this really interesting progression that I've kind of documented in her play and in her image making that seems to also tell the story as well. Also in sculptures that she started making too, of really foundational, all the cushions balancing up in, and I'm like, oh my God, are you doing foundational kind of organizational structure? As she's kind of making these tall balancing kind of organized sequential formations, as well as a new relationship with her baby doll, that she's never had that ongoing attachment. So this baby doll then became the primary focus for 2 weeks of this continuity of connection and care and attentiveness, with prosody and receptivity in the way that she was caring. And I feel like this has been the most wonderful documentation of her experiential, process, that has also then been a reflection point of talking about the picture and who's here, and and as you're telling me that story, what do you notice, or what else is part of that story? So I also just want to share that as a kind of qualitative process of assessment that could be also a really interesting storytelling and experiential reflection point too.
Jill, thank you so much for sharing that. That was great, wonderful. I know I often use a lot of pictures when I did a lot of work with the kids with our focus system, but I think using it with the SSP is a nice journey, and watching that thing unravel. So lovely. The one thing I wanted to sort of expand a little bit more on beyond that, and I'm sure we'll probably come back to assessments again, is not only what we're sort of seeing in the children and helping educate the children, but obviously the families that, Porges very much talks about, and all of us sort of about the SSP is a way to help kind of bridge that awareness of the body, that it helps provide that sort of neural platform for the possibility to be aware of the body and to open up those engagement sort of systems. But if you're not having that being met on the other side, well, that system will start to move back into in defensive mode. So I did have a question where a child had that was submitted, where a child had completed the protocol and was having some shifts and changes and maybe a bit of sort of heightened responses, the parent was sort of really sort of concerned about these sort of increased behavioural outbursts and stuff. And I think Porges sort of talks about a story where a practitioner shared, or a mother should have shared, that her child, she noticed that her child had just gone through her child just completed the SSP, and the mum had come to pick them up or something, and the mum had just come from a doctor's appointment where she'd had sort of some bad news. And so her face in greeting her child was flat and not engaged. And her child, who come out of finishing his session, wanted to engage with her, but she wasn't available, and he had this sort of huge, sort of massive meltdown. So we really, when we hear this from our clients about, I'm seeing the child more reactive or having these meltdowns and stuff, is it actually that the child has tried to engage, or the system is engaging, but it's not being met? The parent's still going around the normal sort of day-to-day events, and maybe the parent's stressed and not available, their face is not available, their voice is tight, and their child is therefore going back into those defensive responses, and just getting to that sort of flat face effect. And this was just, I was just listening to that presentation by Porges and Kim Barthel recently, and Porges reminded me of the studies done by Edtronic, where the still face studies, where they would have a child or a toddler sitting with the mum, and the mum's playing, and they're in a high chair, the mum's playing, and then the mum has to turn away and basically come back with a totally unavailable face. And this study has been repeated numerous times around the world with the exact same results. And you see this infant trying to reach to mum to get mum's attention, and then pretty much within seconds, there's a defensive stress, withdrawal, meltdown response because mum's not available. And that is just from that facial. And then the studies go on to show that over time, the child gets over its tantrum and then basically doesn't even bother to engage at all. That they know mum's not available. So how the work that we do with SSP, creating that neural shift, opening it up, that the work also has to come with preparing these families or partners or caregivers to be ready to, they need to shift their behaviour to help be available for when that engagement tries to happen.
Can I ask a question regarding working with teenagers?
Go for it.
So I've got a 14-year-old that responded really well to SSP, but she didn't want to do it with her mother. She did it with her grandmother. So she went and stayed with her grandmother for a week and had some really wonderful shifts from it. But I can't involve her mother because she doesn't want her mother involved. So even if she's had these great shifts, I'm unsure about how much I can then get her mum to start to change her behaviour because the teen doesn't actually want mum involved.
Well, I'm sure there's quite a people, I can see Chris thinking about, well, what's going on with mum? What's going on with that mum and daughter relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mum
needs to do it too.
What was that?
Mum needs to do her course first and then try and engage with her. Yeah.
I was actually wondering a little bit recently about if you've got a child or anybody really who is in not an optimal environment, so they're in a triggering environment. If we then do SSP with them, are we doing damage? But I don't mean necessarily like a significant trauma. I'm just thinking of something as simple as, a child's at a school that's not optimal for them. So every day they're going into the stressful environment. What is the impact of then doing SSP with a child like that?
Can I just ask, Tali, is this you being the co-regulating other for the SSP, or with them doing it remotely?
I generally get them to do it remotely with their parents. But the reason that I actually thought about it was actually relating to my own daughter, because I'd done SSP with her and she wasn't at the best school for her, and we've since moved schools, and I feel like I saw more shifts with her after she'd moved schools when I repeated SSP than when I'd done it with her when she was still in that environment. And so it just made me think about how important is environment in order to, I don't know.
I think it's super important, but I've also done SSP where I'm the co-regulating other in clinic with families that have got a lot of issues bubbling around all the time. And what happened for those little ones is that this became an opportunity for them to understand what feeling safe was. Whereas they didn't have an understanding, not that they could verbalise it, but that understanding didn't necessarily come from home because of the chaotic mess that was always happening at home. So coming into the clinic, sitting quietly, playing with me while listening to the SSP became a really important thing for them. And some of those kids, even afterwards, they'd finished the program, they'd want to come in and still listen to music in sessions and things like that. It became you could see a difference between when they arrived and they were just bouncing off the walls to after they'd finished their session and you'd be handing back a nice regulated child. So then it was about doing some psychoeducation with mum that to how to welcome that child when it was given back, back into the waiting room with mum there. So it was a combination of play therapy concepts with SSP, and it was really quite an interesting thing to watch because that child was able to tap into what it meant to be, to feel safe. I don't know if that's useful.
I've just written in the chat, this is not exactly what Chris was just talking about, or Tali, but I find that the filial play coaching model, which is similar to Greenspan's floor time model, is a helpful way to address some of those issues of the parent, and particularly across cultures when parents actually in some cultures don't play with children, and so they're not seeing the benefit of that. But I think that would sit well beside SSP. I've been able to start using SSP because of lockdown, and because in my context, I think, like Chris, I think being present in the room is important, because I'm not sure how the parents are also going to respond, or how they'll engage with the child. So the filial play coaching model, where you're helping the parent, you're mentoring the parent really in how they are playing with the child. Again, if anyone's training floor time, that's quite similar. I think.
Thank you, Rosemary. Can I just backtrack a little bit to B's comment and just sort of make sure, John, can everyone hear me? Everyone's frozen up. So before I go on, I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me okay.
You're unfrozen now.
Okay, we're unfrozen. Yeah. So B, I just wanted to get back. I'm not sure if we sort of finished off supporting what your question was, and I think if you can have that conversation with mum about that dynamic, and that if this daughter is primarily living with mum, that space sounds like it needs some healing and some connection work there, and where the mum would look to, maybe she does need to sort of go through the SSP, or them sort of explore why, how do we make that relationship a little bit safer for both her and her daughter. I could imagine as a mum too. I mean, yes, you want your child to have a good relationship with grandparents, but I'm sure that really hurt to know that your daughter actually preferred to go off and do this therapy with grandma and not you. So it sounds like there's definitely some work to be done there with mum to help facilitate, because that daughter's behaviour, yes, we're going to get a nice shift with her going to grandma, but over time, if she's only with mum all the time, you could see that some of those challenges may start to resurface again for her. That's just my thoughts anyway for that situation.
So was she 14?
Yeah, she's 14.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know they're exerting control and stuff. And is it just her and her daughter? Is there any other people who are at home?
So it is just her and her daughter, but they've just moved into a combined family. So new partners just moved in with two older children who she has a good relationship with. So it's that I wouldn't say that was an inhibiting factor, having the new partner there. There's always just been mother and daughter throughout growing up, and so this girl really, her grandparents have been her safe place. And she actually doesn't trust anyone to be able to repair that relationship with their mother. Gee
whiz, there's something significant happened there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and probably more so too now that she probably feels even more so mum's moved on to a new relationship, so she's probably feeling even more so on the outer.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a good point. I actually hadn't considered how much it would have hurt mum that she didn't want to do it with her. Because I was, you know, so much thinking about the child that's a really good point. I hadn't considered that.
Yeah. So then you could imagine too, then, remember, it's all neuroception, the subtleties in our energy, in our body language, our tone of voice and face. Imagine how mum must feel when she sort of comes home and like, you know, anyway, but yeah, that's that's a tough one.
Yeah. Do you think mum would be willing to do the program herself?
That's a really good point. I hadn't put it out there, but I'm intrigued. When I see the child next week, I'll say, are you comfortable with me seeing if mum would be prepared to do it? It's a great point.
Yeah. And maybe put it to her, no, I won't say that. Well, let us know. We would love to sort of know how that goes. So with that, I think we sort of get back to Tali and talking about safe space and Chris's, you know, that those times of us providing that sort of safe space in an environment where a child is in a chaotic environment, that we're the co-regulator, you know, that is always that sort of weighing up about, you know, changing the environment or having the parents do it as well. But I think there is a gift when you do provide that opportunity for a child to know this is what it does feel like to feel safe and connected and cared by for another person, that they know that maybe their environment, that there's kind of hope in kind of humanity or their relationships. And I remember Bruce Perry, listening to one of his presentations years ago, and I mightn't have his research correct in my mind, but I know it was like early trauma and the incidence of kids who went on to end up going into a delinquent or juvenile system. And they found that if that person had experience with one caring person in their early life, that was a big difference in terms of the trajectory of kind of, because they felt like they were seen and heard and they mattered. But I think sometimes in those sort of families that, you know, do we actually start with mum and help mum be more aware of herself and do SSP, so then she is better available then for when the child goes through, is sometimes where we need to start. Yeah. I know we're over time now, so was anyone wanted to, I know you've got another question in there, Rosemary, so we might need to come back to that. I know you got it in the chat room, but was there any other comments that people wanted to make before closing up? I know if you got to leave, you got to leave, but I just can't help. I want to share this. Hold it. Let me go back. Sometimes I forget what I'm doing. I just want to share a screen with you because I just want to show you guys something, a shift in posture from listening. So sorry for, let me see if I can find. I screenshot it. Whiteboard Advanced. Let me see if I can find my files. So bear with me a minute. Nope, basic. I thought it would give me, oh, here we go. Show all windows. Here we go. Now I'm and I did take a better picture. Can you all see this picture?
Yeah.
Yes.
I did take another screenshot, but I didn't have it up on my files ready to show you where I opened. But you can see that this boy on the, it's subtle, but you can see him in the first picture here how he's kind of like his neck's jutting forward, his shoulders are a bit more elevated. You see his shoulders are elevated. And then you can see there's quite a softening through his neck. His posture is more aligned. You can see these shoulders dropping down in there. And then the next pictures actually move to, they actually put him through a couple of assessments that we often use in OT, where you do like a flexion, like it looks like a crunch. And you can see him before he did the SSP that he's really straining, he's holding his breath, he can barely hold that crunch. And then she puts him in like a hands and knees, like a 4-point position. And you can see, because he's got low tone, that he's locking his elbows in. You can see this hyperextension through his wrists, and it looks like his shoulder girdles, it's kind of rounded through his back, and his like scapula look like they're not well stabilized. And she moves his head from side to side, and we're looking for reflex sort of stuff, and you can see elbow flexion. So let us know that that system isn't well integrated. And then the next test we do is prone extension. So we're looking at all this anti-gravity musculature, and you can see his hands are fisted, and he's really working hard to maintain that. And then Kim does those same 3 positions after a period of listening, and you can see he does this crunch position, and he turns around, he looks at his mum, and he's like, wow, this is so much easier, because he's not holding his breath, and you can just see it's so much easier. And then she puts him in his 4-point position, and he's more stable through his shoulder girdle, and there's minimal overflow into elbow flexions when you rotate the head. We look at AT&R positioning. And then prone extension, hands are loose, we get a nice prone extension. It's like you look like a Superman, so you have to kind of balance on your belly button, and you're using all those extensor muscles to hold you, and he holds it lovely. So it was just a really nice, so this is in that presentation with Porges and Kim Barthel, but some nice quick little testing that you can even look at for posture to see quite a shift in posture with that. So I just wanted to kind of end with that as another little thing that we can sort of look at with our clients, because we know when we've got good posture, that breath is able to come in, be better managed and controlled, which is all linked into being able to keep our heart in a more calm state. So Andrea, this will be our last comment.
And it's not really a comment, it's just a quick question. I noticed you'd sent out the, I think with the training from the Polyvagal Institute, I just wanted to ask what, it says that the 2 extra bits at the bottom are digital add-ons, but I didn't know what they meant by that. Is that there was 2 pieces? I can't remember what they were. There was some webinars by the looks of it. I
think what I saw for this is so the Polyvagal Institute are doing their first annual conference, November 6th and 7th, and I think those other options, Andrea, were just like, when you purchase to attend the conference, you get access for 30 days, I think, to listen to the recordings. Or the other option that I think is when you actually get to purchase and you can download and have those presentations further. I think that was the choice.
Okay, thanks.
If I'm right, are you actually on the landing page for the Polyvagal Institute to register for the course? Is that what you're...
No, I'm not at the moment. I'm going to have a look at it. I was in 2 minds about it because I've done so much recently, and I wasn't sure whether some of it was, stuff already covered, so I was interested in what that was.
Well, they have a variety of speakers, and I thought it was kind of interesting because they've actually got somebody who's going to be talking about from polyvagal and yoga, another one talking about education, talking about education to school systems. They've actually got a neonatologist coming on, so I thought that would be kind of very interesting, polyvagal in the NICU. So I thought it looked like there might be some novel topics.
They've got Katie Dickinson on there, who's an OT in the UK. I've been talking to her, and she does the TRE therapy, so that'll be interesting with SSP together.
Yes. So the TRE is a trauma releasing.
I don't know anything about it, but she uses it a lot. She often uses it pre-SSP, she said. I had a chat with her a couple of times because she's linked in with Liz. That's how I know her. But she's working a lot in that area. So
there's a guy in Melbourne who does the TRE training.
Yeah, is he good? Do you know much about him?
Yeah,
I've done the introduction course. I did the introduction course. Yeah,
I'm not
Yeah,
sure
same.
about it, but I'm curious.
I did a little workshop with him. I did a 2-hour workshop with him in a Pilates studio. He's good.
Yeah, he's definitely embedding polyvagal into all his theory and language and stuff. I liked him. There's only so much I can take on, but I wouldn't mind completely doing the training. But I found it.
I'm just curious about it.
Well, there's a nice chat with Porges. Porges is very much on board with it because from an evolutionary perspective, you see animals, when they're attacked, they shake it off.
Yeah.
They shake it off,
Yeah.
I can't remember, is his name Richard or something like that?
Yeah.
Richard or Russell?
Is it Richmond, Heath?
Richmond, that's it, yes.
I've looked him up and I was like dabbling thinking, oh, shall I give it a go when we come out of lockdown? So I'm good to hear that some of you've explored it.
He does it online Zoom sessions. You can from
Katie's offered to do it. Katie's offered to do it with me online from the UK as well. So I'm really kind of curious, but it kind of feels so strange, the idea.
Yeah.
It's actually something that you can actually put clients onto, and they can do it themselves. They can join in and do it. So they don't need to have the therapist telling them what to do. They can actually explore that stuff themselves, which can be useful. Once you've done the basic psychoed around polyvagal theory and some of the somatic responses people have to things, it's opens up doors to them to be able to do it. I've got one client in particular that did it and uses it a lot combined with all the other therapeutic stuff that she does, including focus and SSP and stuff.
Can I ask, has anyone tried tremor release with children?
No, not yet.
I would be really hesitant about doing it with children. Okay. One of the reasons it comes up for me immediately, be really careful with children, and that is because they don't necessarily have the same bracing occurring in them that adults would have, and that if you're going to get them to release too much too fast and then they return back to the unsafe environment, for example, what does that mean then for them to be able to? They need to be hyper vigilant in certain environments to keep themselves safe, and what that might mean. So that just came straight up for me. That's all.
Because I did something like that years ago for myself, which really helped me. And my kids are both on the spectrum, and they were always a bit too young, but now they're adolescents. One's 16, one's 13. And I thought, well, maybe they could do it now, because you have to also, I don't know, it's. Even just letting go I think you need to have some awareness of what you're doing. And
I would almost explore doing some EMDR with kids. There's some good EMDR pediatric practitioners.
I did ask for my daughter, but because she's got an intellectual disability, they said they don't recommend it. So anyway.
What about something like sensory motor art therapy?
Yeah.
I'm working with a client at the moment where I was starting with EMDR. I'm trained in that, and then I want to go on to SSP next, but just because of his particular fears. So EMDR is very effective with children. You obviously have to be trained in it, and I see it as a modality again that could be part of your range of modalities where SSP has a place, and then other interventions, just like the focus program as well, but in a different way. And with EMDR, you can do it with butterfly hug. It doesn't have to be and that's quite accessible for children to learn to use that. No, I think that EMDR, I can't see why EMDR would be contraindicated for kids with a disability, because I
think she said that they don't. She was sort of saying
well, you might need to find you might need to find a different practitioner.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Or even someone who does brain spotting.
Yeah.
Which is brain spotting.
Yes.
Brain spotting, tapping.
Which is similar. There's a relationship there. I think with everything, it's you work out what works for a particular person.
Yep.
And in the context, like one of you was talking about the context and how will they be in it if they go back into a home environment that's not necessarily safe. Yeah, but no, you work out with your client what works for them.
Okay, so I am going to call today. But I love the conversation, and I thank everyone so much for your contributions, and a great learning for all of us. So hopefully I'll see you all in a month's time, and definitely if anything comes up between now and then, a topic that you want to dig into a little deeper, some other cases that you want to discuss, you know, I love hearing from you all. So everyone have a great afternoon, and I'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.